Take your plans out of the group chat and get long weekend ready in new Abercrombie. From day to night, pack new outfits for every part of your itinerary. Grabbing brunch? Throw on the A&F Mila dress. Then head to your dinner reservation in their new bubble hem mini dress. And yes, permission to overpack for pics with the girls. Abercrombie's best-selling Scarlet Squirt deserves a post in your feed. Your plans are worth it. Shop Abercrombie's new long weekend collection online or in store.
Check. And welcome, everybody, to an amazing Friday. A little day late. Sorry about that. But welcome to Amazing Friday here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Today's show will be digging into a little bit about spending, a little contract I want to go over. And then also, we'll be talking about legislation. We're getting to those final few days of the legislature. So, of course, we're going to start seeing some bills passing we don't want to pass. We'll be digging into what's getting moved, what's getting some life under it. After we'll cover all that here today. Before I dig down into it, please make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast. Make sure you're sharing it with others too as well. Important stuff. Helps spread the word. Helps people know where to listen, where to stay informed here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So Chastity Dotson, that's a actress. You probably have no idea who she is, or maybe you really enjoyed her 8 episodes on Veronica Mars. Chances are you probably wouldn't even recognize her if you saw her on screen again, or have any realization of who she is or what she's been in. But maybe, like I said, you're just a huge fan of her work. But what a lot of people probably don't know is that Chastity Dotson, even if you knew she was a D-level actress, founded a nonprofit called 300 for 300. Now, as of about September 2024, it seems like this nonprofit basically doesn't exist anymore. They haven't made a post on their social media since then. It's been about 6 months since their last Instagram post. Prior to 2024, according to their Form 990s with the IRS, they weren't even bringing in over $50,000 a year. Instead, they were filing what was called, e-cards. Basically, because they didn't even have $50,000 brought in, so they were able to not file full Form 990s as the IRS would require if you're a nonprofit bringing in more than that. Now, you may wonder, Andrew, why are you bringing up this D-level actress and her not even $50K a year nonprofit? Well, I thought you should know that in 2023, the Department of Public Health decided to go ahead and give this nonprofit 300 for 300 over $500,000. They actually gave them $520,000 in taxpayer funds and your money. And you would say, Andrew, well, they must have been doing something super important, something super specialized. Well, let me tell you exactly what this scope of work for this contract was. So it says their scope of services for 300 Incorporated must, through direct outreach, identify applicants and their specific learning, emotional, and functional needs for the upcoming cohorts, including home situations, interests, transportation, and income statuses through an intake process. Conduct surveys during and after the intake process, then conduct 2 6-week intensive creative writing and expression program cohorts, including programming for 20 girls who will receive a minimum of 66 hours of program sessions. Complete surveys and other feedback before, during, and after the cohorts for evaluation. Conduct 2 3-week youth leadership summits where participants will receive a minimum of 18 hours of program sessions to explore the meaning of leadership, personal missions, and the importance of services. Document the summit via surveys, videos, photos, measurable outcomes, marketing, and reporting. Goes on to say hire staff to improve capacity and sustainability for 300 programming, identify new community partners, provide continued support for cohort alumni and fundraising initiatives, and a robust development plan evaluate program efficiency for immediate and long-term impact as it relates to the cohort's participants' well-being, addressing the social determinants of health, ability to meet desired outcomes, and opportunities for improvement. So the scope of work was to do 2 6-week creative writing and expression programs for 20 girls. Now, I believe that would be 20 girls each, who will receive a minimum of 66 hours of programming. In other words, that's about 11 hours a week. So 40 girls getting 11 hours a week. That'd be 440. Then, on top of that, let's say it's the 40 girls. It may be only 20, but let's say it's 40 because it's kind of unclear. Then they want 2 3-week youth leadership summits where participants will receive a minimum of 18 hours of program sessions. So another 18 times 40, that's more hours there for the leadership summit. So that comes out to 1,160 total hours of instructional time. And so for $520,000 divided by 1,160 instructional hours, y'all, that is a payment of $448.28 an hour for a creative writing class. For a creative writing class. Even if you agree with somehow paying private nonprofits to send middle school girls to creative writing classes, and not just handling that within our own educational system, even if you agreed with all of that, at a cost of $448 an hour? Are you kidding me? And then let's throw in the racial factor into all this. It was specifically for, in case you missed it in the scope, girls of color. In fact, 300 for 300 was founded to help specifically black or brown girls. It was founded after Breonna Taylor. Their website says they were inspired by Breonna Taylor. So to sum all this up for you here, we have the Kentucky Department of Public Health, that's who issued this contract, paying $520,000 or $448.28 an hour to a seemingly now defunct nonprofit. Keep in mind, the scope of work said you had to become self-sufficient. I guess they failed on that. Will we get our money back? Because they clearly weren't able to maintain being sufficient if they haven't even been able to make an Instagram or Facebook post in about 6 months. Regardless, so we pay $448 an hour for a creative writing class that's only for black or brown girls. So you've got taxpayer funds being handed out based upon your skin color and your skin color only, being given to private nonprofits that have never brought in that kind of money before, haven't brought in that kind of money since, that haven't been very active in the last 6 months. To accomplish what? Lining the pockets of those who work for the nonprofit? That seems to be the case. Is this how you would want to spend your money? Of course not. But those are exactly the kind of contracts right before us. And you know what? We don't need a special department to discover this. That's just right there in the contract search. If you go over to the transparency website, contract search, and search 300 for 300, you'd be pretty shocked by what you would see. Now, you may ask, Andrew, how'd you find this? Well, I started realizing the Department of Public Health writes all kinds of weird, wacky contracts to weird, wacky NGOs, and so I just started searching their name and looking through the contracts that they're writing. And I found this one in like 2 minutes of looking. Those are the kinds of simple things that our government could be doing to discover exactly what's going on with our money and then take action on it. But, you know, they don't have time for that. Instead, the legislature's too busy trying to seemingly screw over their citizens.
Building a portfolio with Fidelity Basket Portfolios is kind of like making a sandwich. It's as simple as picking your stocks and ETFs, sort of like your meats and other toppings, and managing it as one big, juicy investment. Now Now that's pretty good. Learn more at fidelity.com/baskets. Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC. Member NYSE SIPC.
And I bring this up. So far this year, the legislature had actually been doing pretty good. I mean, they haven't harmed us too much. They've had some good bills like House Bill 2, dealing with sales tax on gold, House Bill 1, tax reduction, protecting religious liberties. Good things. And then the crap bills started rolling. I already talked about Senate Bill 1. That's the film bill. That's the Senate's top priority that's moving through. Absolutely complete waste of money, bringing Hollywood into Kentucky for their temporary jobs to and this was a point I didn't really make when I was talking about it, but it's worth bringing up that, if you're somebody who even believes that we should be investing funds into Kentucky job market as the government and not just deregulating it as much as we can to make it as attractive as we can for businesses of all sizes to operate in Kentucky. Even if you don't think that's the case, we shouldn't be doing that. What you can be rest assured in is that spending money attracting the film industry here is absolutely not and should not be a priority because, frankly, and this is coming from, in Asbury School, they have a pretty good film program, and I was talking to somebody who had recently come across some members there, and they had stated that currently in Kentucky, with the staff in Kentucky, we can only do 2 major movies at a time with the current people and companies. So what that would mean is if we're going to attract in the film industry, we're going to necessarily attract in out-of-state people to come work in Kentucky. Now, I don't know about you, but if you're going to be taking money from our pockets to give it to a private company to then create quote-unquote jobs, shouldn't those jobs at least be jobs that the people whose money you're taking could conceivably work? Shouldn't it not be jobs that people that don't even live in this state end up having to come in and fill? It's one thing to say, people end up moving to the state because there's better jobs here, better opportunities. That's okay. But when there's no conceivable way that the vast majority of people could fill these jobs to the point where they are necessarily going to have to hire out of state, using taxpayer funds to then subsidize the creation of those jobs is literally stealing from Kentucky citizens and then giving it to people who don't even live here right now, whose money it isn't even close to kind of being. But of course, the legislature sees nothing wrong with that. We also have an update on House Bill 399. For those of you who don't remember, that's the bill that would make it a Class D felony to interrupt a legislative proceeding on the second offense as the bill was originally wrote. So first offense was a Class A misdemeanor. Second offense was a Class D felony. That's a loss of gun ownership, voting rights, and 5 years in prison. Of course, the legislature, of course, they'd be the ones to say that if somebody stands up and yells up in the gallery or in a committee hearing because they disagree with what's going on, whether we agree with them or not, the legislature says, you know what, we need to throw them in jail for 5 years and take away their voting rights, take away their ability to own a firearm. That's the same level that we punish some people who commit things like child abuse and possession of child pornography and rape and sodomy. But hey, interrupt the legislature, because keep in mind, somebody interrupts it right now, it's a 5-minute delay. KSP comes in, they remove you. So this bill would say that if you interrupt us for 5 minutes, if you do it a second time, it's going to be a felony. It's absolutely ridiculous. And as I brought up at the time, this is clearly government worried about protecting itself more than the citizens. Now, there was an amendment on House Bill 39. It passed the House today. Kind of did pass the House, though, with far less votes than typical House bills normally do. In this case, it passed with, only 68 votes? 68 votes. That's fairly low amount of votes, 68 votes, considering everything. But regardless, there was an amendment filed by T.J. Roberts on the bill that did greatly improve it. Instead of shall arrest, it led to may arrest, meaning that it would be within some discretion whether or not a person was arrested for it. It did make sure to exempt the rotunda because the way the bills wrote is if you protest too loudly that they feel it's interrupting a legislative proceeding, they can then charge you for the crime of interference with the legislative proceeding. Even if you're not in the room, even if you're not in the gallery or sitting out in the crowd while they're trying to pass a bill, if you're just outside the doors being too loud and they found it too annoying, the way the bill was wrote, you could be grabbed for that. The way the bill's also wrote is that if you facilitate or organize something, even if you're not there, and then that happens, you could also be arrested for doing so. You could be on your way into... You could organize a protest on your way there, get into a car accident, end up in the hospital, and then end up arrested with a Class D felony with a broken collarbone for not even being in the Capitol and it getting too rowdy. So the amendment did move the Class D felony to the third offense instead of the second offense. It did make sure that the rotunda was exempt in just general places of normal protest. So that way, if you're getting too loud in the Capitol building, but in the rotunda where protests are often held, I've organized protests there myself, then in turn, they would go ahead and, make sure those areas were safe. And then also, like I said, it moved from shall to may. That kind of lets them have a little more leeway on how they want to deal with the situation. Regardless, the 5 to 10 minute interruption that it currently is when somebody stands up and yells something in the legislature. And keep in mind, too, the House and the Senate can both just clear the galleries. So if they have one or two people do it, they can say, okay, everybody out, closing the gallery, and they can choose to do that. So I never think that should be a felony. I never think you should lose your gun ownership rights or your ability to vote or hold office or anything else because you interrupted the legislature. But regardless, that passed 68-26. There. But I've got another stinker bill that I actually haven't touched on before. That's House Bill 700. Even if you're not a deer hunter, you want to listen up because this is like the deer version of COVID. It's called chronic wasting disease, CWD. And it's in much like COVID, they don't exactly know how it's transmitted. In fact, if you go on the CDC's website, it will actually say... It'll say scientists think CWD spreads between animals through contact with saliva, blood, urine, or feces of an animal with CWD. They suspect it can also spread indirectly through environments such as in the soil, drinking water, or food. So both things are think and suspect. They have no exact idea how it spreads. And currently in Kentucky, there's been 2 cases. And so the reaction is what I would say is kind of over the top, especially considering the fact that CWD has never infected a human. Also considering the fact that when you take states like Wisconsin that have had CWD for quite some time and have, I believe, the largest percentage of deer testing positive for CWD in the country, and yet their herd numbers, the number of deer they have in the state, are at all-time highs. That also might point to, maybe we're freaking out a little bit more than we need to. Regardless, House Bill 700 takes this kind of deer COVID, CWD. Now, it is always fatal, supposedly always fatal, unlike COVID. And I say supposedly always fatal because the weird thing is that, these issues being found are either found in captive deer, obviously after they kill them to slaughter them, or they're found in deer that you otherwise have shot or somebody is harvesting. That's the most oftentimes they find it. So it's interesting the claim that it's always fatal when you consider that the deer who they're testing are normally killed by other means, human means. So just something to think about there. But anyways, so they say it's always fatal. Let's just take that face value. It's bad. Regardless, we don't want our deer herds and our elk herds out east heavily affected by this. And so currently what happens is if there is a infection detected, the Fish and Wildlife Commission will have a meeting and a vote to decide which counties become a part of the CWD zones. Currently in CWD zones, you can't move carcasses out of those zones. And you can't move heads out of those zones. You can only move boneless meat out of those zones. So that's like processed deer meat that's off the bone. And so that's currently what it is. And right now there are, I think, about 10, 11 counties in that because there's 2 cases. The vote was had. Now, it's interesting and is evidence to the fact that, these regulations on CWD do, in fact, interrupt a recreational hunter, not just deer farms, who we'll dig into here in a second. But the recreational, normal public land or private land hunting, wild deer hunting individual, it does disrupt their plans, as evidenced by the fact that in one of the original votes, I do believe it was Grayson County, was supposed to be included in the CWD surveillance zone, but then it was conspicuously left off when it came time to vote. As I've heard, one of the perhaps commissioners hires up on the commission has hunts in that county and didn't want his plans interrupted by that vote, by the regulations, and so that county was removed. That's just what I'm told. And so that's kind of gives you some evidence that the current rules are disruptive to hunters and wild hunters, as well as deer farms. And, this bill, House Bill 700, takes what is our current process of voting and kind of individual case-by-case basis deciding, and then moving it to now a requirement that when CWD is found in a county, they now draw a 30-mile radius, and if more than 10% of that county is in that 30-mile radius, it now becomes a part of the CWD zone. So that would move our current CWD zones from like 10 to like 21, 22-ish, somewhere in there. That would almost double the amount of counties with the same number of cases. Within a few years, Kentucky, the entire state would be different CWD zones. And then the law states that you have to remain CWD for 5 years in order for them to lift the area. Now, what isn't clear to me is if something is 29 miles away from the point, because it's, a 30-mile radius. So if it's 20 miles away from the point of the case, or 25 miles or 29 miles, and there's another CWD case there, does that restart the 5 years for that area, and then does it draw a new area around it? That's how I would interpret it. So you end up with, one case, if it falls into the right area, now outlawing potentially, 60 miles diameter almost, or, another 30 miles, I guess it would be. Diametered area away, and then adding to that. And this gets even stranger that it's so big when you consider the fact that the average deer spends its life inside about a square mile area. And this is setting up basically surveillance zones, kind of like a quarantine zones of almost 2,800 square miles for an animal that travels 1 square mile. That seems pretty extreme. And it seems like it really spreads out the area, and keep in mind, then that affects the rules. So people like myself, hunters like myself that live in more urban areas like Lexington or Louisville or even northern Kentucky, we have to drive about an hour and a half in order to get to modern gun hunting land for deer. There's a few WMAs, wildlife management areas, that may allow archery or some other things close by. Of course, those are pretty heavily hunted because you have literally the tens of thousands of hunters in places like Lexington hunting those one lands. So it can get heavy. You've got some other hunting areas around there. But for modern gun, you kind of have to drive at least an hour to 2 in order to get to where you're hunting at. And so with the CWD rules in place where you cannot transport a deer carcass out of there, what that would mean is if I go into that area and hunt and kill a deer, I can't bring it back to my house to process it. The typical way for you non-hunters is you harvest a deer, you take a deer, you call it in, you throw it in the back of your truck, You drive it home, you string it up, and then you go through the process of skinning it and then cutting the meat off the bone, and then maybe you grind that up for burger or cut it into steaks or make it into roast or jerky or whatever you're going to do with it. But you do it at that point, and generally, there's different beliefs, and so none of you hunters jump down my throat, but, normally you like your deer to hang for a day or two to let it age a little bit. Some say it makes the meat taste better. That's what I typically do. And so that would now outlaw this. People like myself would be unable to do that. Also, CWD doesn't allow you to transport heads out of the area unless, all the brain matter's missing, all the skin's missing, everything else. So if I take a deer and I want to mount it, well, even if I somehow string it up there and cape it, I would have to now find a taxidermist within that area to take care of the deer. And so what this sets up for deer hunters like me is if I want to process my own meat, and if I take a good buck, get that taxidermied, I'm better off going to a state like Maine, which I believe is CWD free, going to a state like Maine, buying my tags there, taking a deer there, and then bringing it back to Kentucky so I can process it how I want to and taxidermy it wherever I want to, than I would be hunting in Kentucky when basically all the good hunting areas end up becoming CWD surveillance zones. The other issue for this is that when it's illegal to transport it out of the area, you now lose your out-of-state hunters. I'm talking about wild hunters here too. I haven't even gotten to the deer farm problems in this bill. But the out-of-state hunters that do things like buy leases and buy licenses with the state of Kentucky, and even in-state, if you're hunting in Lexington, you may pay $1,500, $2,000 a year to lease land to hunt on a few hours away from you, but also out-of-state people do the same, and you can no longer deal with that because you're going to, or at least it greatly cuts down on your hunting because you're going to have to go into the area, you're going to have to string the deer up, and you're going to have to, process it there. But then you take a trophy, which is what you're paying leases for because you want a big buck. Right, wrong, or indifferent. You can disagree with hunting all you want to. That's the drive of these people. And that's good. If from a conservation standpoint, big bucks mean they're old bucks. That means they have in that area populated that area. And if you want to make sure you don't have, incest and you can spread apart the bloodlines and things like that. You want to take old deer because big bucks bully smaller deer from the does, and they're not particularly discerning about whether or not it's a doe that they sired or not. And so big bucks will push out the younger bucks, and then in turn now they're the only deer that in the area that does are mating with, and you end up, like I said, with some incest. So it's good to be taking these big old deer. That's what you want from a sheer conservation standpoint. If you like deer and like seeing them. And so, but now you take a big buck, you can't take it home with you. You're going to have to find a taxidermist within that area that hopefully can take your deer in. And I say hopefully because taxidermists are sometimes hard to find. And so that's going to stop people from buying out-of-state licenses. It'll stop people like me from buying in-state licenses. And the question becomes, for those of you who support the bill, because Fish and Wildlife support this bill, partially, I think, due to the fact that CWD money from the federal government's huge, the same way, COVID money was huge. But also, I don't think they're thinking through the ideas that people will not want to hunt these areas. People will lose business in these areas. Tourism dollars will go away. People won't travel into the state, and people in state won't be paying license fees. And how do you maintain the public lands you have if people like me and out-of-staters aren't buying licenses? Now, you may say, well, why won't they think that through? And I tell you, there's some mindsets within hunting. There's this subculture of people that, while this may be public land, if it's local public land to them, they believe it's their land. I'll tell you a story. Me and my buddy, we go down to eastern Kentucky this past turkey season. We stay at a campsite that's right off of some public hunting, and then we go in the morning to public hunting. Some locals came in, and they took their e-bikes out. Technically, they crossed over the private land of the campgrounds to get to the public land, but, whatever. And so then they parked their trucks and they took their e-bikes out through the woods in order to get to their hunting spot. And we, drove down the road a bit to it, parked our truck and walked in there, trying to avoid where they went. And I end up getting a bird, taking it back, and we have it strung up at our campsite as we're, taking in our morning success. And the locals are driving by and they flip us off and cussing at us because they're mad that we took a bird that they deem this is our land. Even though it's public land, even though my license fees, my buddy's license fees pay for that land and we have every right to hunt there, they believe it is their land. And so people with that mindset have absolutely no problem with the bill. In fact, they love this bill because it keeps people like me out of their area. Then you have, of course, the people who own their own land to hunt on or hunt pretty locally to them, where the chances that a CWD zone comes up that they will now be inconvenienced by the fact that they can't take their deer out of this giant area is so small, they won't be inconvenienced by it. So the point I'm getting to is the urban type hunters like myself and the out-of-state hunters have no seat at the table to speak up and say, look, this bill's a problem for XYZ reasons, and you're going to end up pushing people like us out, and you're no longer going to have the same fees coming in. You're not going to be able to maintain your public hunting land. But the other reason why they're pushing this bill so heavily is because they really don't like deer farms. For those of you unaware, there's about 120 deer farms around the area here in Kentucky, and they're no joke. I mean, they're big deals. I was, one deer farm that I know of brings in $1.5 million, $2 million a year in revenue. And right, wrong, or indifferent, you can disagree or agree with high fence hunting and all these other things, or also, too, when you're in a CWD zone, it takes away baiting. And so sometimes these maybe these outfitters or these guides that have the ability to hunt 500 acres of private land or own 500 acres of private land, and they're doing guided hunts on it. And keep in mind, in some of these rural areas of Kentucky, this is their tourism. In some campgrounds in rural areas of Kentucky, they don't exist without deer and turkey season. In some of these hunting areas where they own 400 or 500 acres of hilly land that can't be farmed and can't be built on and can't be used for anything else, the only way they make money and can pay property taxes on that land that the government reaps rewards from is by doing hunting leases, is by doing guided hunts on those lands. And when you have a CWD zone, you're not allowed to bait, meaning you're not allowed to do corn feeders or other things to attract deer in the area. And so when you have somebody come in from out of state, and these richer guys like them or hate them, it doesn't really matter. What matters is they come in, they only have a few days to hunt. They're going to want to be put on deer. And so you do things like put out the corn feeders to make sure the deer are coming through at the right time so they can get eyes on deer, so that way they keep coming back. Or if you're doing the high fence where you're growing bucks, you do that because you don't want to risk that deer traveling onto somebody else's. If you're growing bucks, it might be on 400 or 500 acres. They're typically sizable. This isn't like you're growing bucks on 10 acres. These are typically, hundreds of acres of farms that then have high fences, because while it still creates kind of the same, close to the same kind of home range a buck normally has, you're not risking it traveling onto other people's land and then somebody killing it. And now you're not able to grow the giant deer. And of course, when people come into an area and they're hunting, they want those big bucks. They want something they can really put on their wall. And so, growing those deer, keeping them from going onto other land is important to your business model. Like I said, you can like it or hate it. You can agree with it, disagree with it. I'm not typically a high fence hunter. I don't see as much of the draw for me personally, but who am I to judge how people get their meat? I mean, it's not like my cows aren't coming from a high fence farm or something. Of course, I get my beef from a local fenced in farm. So if that's how you want to get your meat and that's how you want to get your trophies, look, that's your decision, in my opinion. It's not the sport for me, but maybe that's something you're into, and I'm not here to tell you can't do that. And so this bill, House Bill 700, also really targets the farms and says essentially if there's CWD in an area, these farms can't even operate anymore. It puts them out of business, and they're talking about losing millions of dollars. But Fish and Wildlife don't like those farms. So anyways, that's kind of to give you some update on House Bill 700. There's a better way to do this. There's a better way to go through it. There's a better way to set up things such as, whether that's some fencing rules to make sure deer aren't nose to nose than what the bill has. The bill is talking about having double fences, which doesn't make, basically that means you'd have to now build a whole second fence around your property. We're talking about a big, big expense. That seems a little extreme. There's some other ways to keep what is grown deer from coming across other deer if that's what you're concerned about. And there's better ways to deal with CWD as a hunter hunting wild deer, have field dressing areas where within CWD zones set up by Fish and Wildlife where I can take my deer, hang it up, and I can go through the process there, staying in the zone, and even discard of the rest of my carcass inside of a dumpster, which means it's controlled now, because that's what they're worried about. They're worried about you taking the carcass outside of it and disposing of it in such a way that then it can contaminate deer in a new area. Well, if you're disposing of it in a dumpster there, not only can they test every single deer now easily, but also you're able to contain the contaminant. So process the deer there. You throw it in a dumpster there, and if you do get a trophy you want to take, you can take it to a CWD testing place, give it over to them. They can test it for CWD. If it tests clear, they can then ship it to a taxidermist. Maybe you pay them $50 or $100 or whatever for shipping, and they'll ship it to any taxidermist you want to after it tests clear of CWD. So that way, people like me, I hunt in an area, I take a deer. It's an inconvenience. Maybe I got to make sure I plan for it, but nobody wants CWD to necessarily spread. And so I can take it to the entrance of that hunting area. I'll string it up, or to the a processing warehouse. If there's one in the area, I can string it up. I can process it there, and then take my cooler of meat back. And if I want to cape it and keep the head for the taxidermist, I can choose to do that and drop that off at their testing place. So that means even if I'm out of stater, yes, I may not be able to hunt. I got to take in consideration that if I'm on my last day of hunting, I need to leave that evening, I have to take a deer, before X o'clock to make sure I have time to dress it and get the deer dropped off and everything, and head dropped off and so on and so forth. But at least it doesn't cut people like me and out-of-staters off from hunting in the area, but that's not being offered here. No, that's not a requirement here, which would be an obvious way to go ahead and take care of this. So, anyways, that's, I know not everybody cares about hunting, but that's a bad bill. There's another bad bill going through that dealt with homeschools that would have made it illegal to take your kid out of public schools if they're determined to be potentially truant by the public schools. So you could come and say, hey, look, my kid's missing a lot of school. I'm going to homeschool them. Maybe they're missing because of illness. Maybe they're being bullied at that school, so they don't want to obviously go into school, show up. And that's why you're homeschooling them in the first place. Well, this bill would have made it to where you can't do that, can't take them out of the public schools. You're locked in. Can't homeschool them unless they're a perfect kid already at public schools, which, like I said, most people are taking them out of public schools because it isn't working for you for whatever reason. That bill, though, since it's changed, all that's taken out of it. So that's good. That bad part of the bill has been removed. It's pretty much dropped all those provisions, so there's no use in really talking about that. We've had civil asset forfeiture bills that have passed the House that are pretty awful. Hit on Senate Bill 1. Talked here about House Bill 700. That's coming up for a vote, I think, on Tuesday. That's that CWD bill is just going over. So you want to call on that one and tell them, hey, look, don't vote yes on that bill. That's a bad bill, right? We want to make sure that bad bills end up dying in a horrible death. And that number for you guys to call into your legislature is 1-800-372-7181. Once again, that's 1-800-372-7181. Well, next week, big show for you guys. Congressman Comer is going to join the show on Monday. We're going to have a good lengthy interview, so I hope you tune in and listen to that. Hope you all have a great rest of your day and have a great weekend.